The first sign that something was wrong in my house was not dramatic. No kicked-in door, no shattered window, no overturned drawer. Just a lamp turned a few degrees off, a stack of papers moved by an inch, and a picture frame that no longer looked at me. I had my shoulder against the door of my study, nudging it open the way I had 1,000 times before. The hallway light from behind me slid into the room and spilled across the hardwood floor, reaching toward the big oak desk by the window. My hand went up automatically to hit the light switch on the wall. Halfway there, my fingers stopped. The room wasn't dark exactly, just dim. The street lights outside breathed a weak orange through the blinds. It was enough for me to see the outline of everything: the desk, the shelves, the leather chair, the small safe hidden in the corner behind the filing cabinet. It was also enough to see that the world inside those outlines wasn't exactly as I'd left it. The lamp that usually sat square at the back, left corner of my desk was angled slightly toward the edge. Not much, maybe 3 fingers wide. The legal pads that always rested flush with the desk blotter were pushed forward just enough to cast a different shadow, and the framed photograph of my wife, which had faced my chair for 34 years, was turned half an inch away, as if she were looking past me instead of at me. No one else in the world would have noticed, but I am not everyone else. My name is Thomas Mercer. I spent 30 years as a federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York. My job was to stand in courtrooms under fluorescent lights and point to details that no one else thought mattered. A skipped initial, a missing comma on a contract, a bank transfer sent 10 minutes after a phone call that never happened. People like to think that trials are won with big speeches. They're not. They're won with the small things that prove someone was there when they said they weren't, did what they swore they didn't, and touched what they insisted they never went near. The lamp, the papers, the photograph, small things. I stepped into the study and let the door fall almost closed behind me. I did not turn on the overhead light. I stood there in the half-dark, letting my eyes adjust, listening to the old house breathe. The window in front of the desk looked out onto our narrow Brooklyn street. It was early evening. I could hear a bus sighing at the corner, someone's music leaking through a cracked open window, the faint rattle of a skateboard on pavement. Inside, the only sound was the low hum of the air conditioner in the living room. I moved closer to the desk, my shoes whispering against the floor. The faint groove in the wood where my chair always sat caught my eye. The chair was back farther than usual. Whoever had been in this room had sat in my seat. They had shifted their weight enough times to slide the chair back. They had rested an elbow on the desk and moved the lamp, the pads, the photo. They had made themselves at home here. I felt my chest tighten, then settle. It scared me less than it should have. That, more than anything else, told me how much of my old self was still alive. I crossed to the corner where the gray metal filing cabinet stood, shoulder to shoulder with the bookcase. Behind it, mostly hidden from casual view, was the safe I'd had installed 25 years earlier. I'd worked organized crime back then. People threatened you, your wife, your kid. Most of it was theater. Some of it wasn't. You learned to respect worst-case scenarios. The safe was small by vault standards, big enough for documents, not big enough for a person's whole life. Or so I had thought. The beam of light from the hallway caught the dial at an angle. Tiny nicks and scratches circled the lock, bright, fresh silver against the darker metal. Someone had tried to open it. I lowered myself to one knee, the cartilage in my joints cracking a quiet protest. I ran a fingertip over the marks. They were shallow, imprecise, like someone had used the wrong tool, a butter knife, a screwdriver, anything but a real lockpick. They hadn't been there a week ago. Of that I was sure. I stood up, punched the combination into the dial, and opened the door. The familiar smell of old paper and cool metal washed over me. Everything looked right. At first glance, the deed to the brownstone in Brooklyn Heights that my wife and I had bought when this neighborhood was still up and coming, not impossible. The life insurance policies, the investment statements, the will I'd rewritten after her funeral, old case notes from files I could never quite bring myself to throw away. All present, all in the wrong order. The deed no longer sat neatly on top. It was halfway down the stack, corners bent. The will had migrated under the insurance policies. One of the envelopes was upside down. A paperclip I'd always hooked over the top right corner of the bank statements was now on the left. Someone had been through my life on paper. Not to steal, to study. I closed the safe gently and spun the dial to lock it. Then I straightened up and looked around my own study, as if it belonged to someone else and I'd just gotten a warrant. What do you do when the crime scene is your own house? For a moment, the 68-year-old version of me, the man with the stiff back, the thinning hair, the reading glasses that kept migrating around the house like timid animals, wanted to chalk it up to his age. Maybe I'd moved something and forgotten. Maybe I'd brushed the lamp. Maybe I'd knocked the picture frame while dusting. The prosecutor in me, the man who had pushed through exhaustion and doubt in countless cases, folded his arms and waited. We both knew the same thing. Wishes are not facts. Facts were scratches on the safe and papers out of place. I left the room without touching anything else, closed the door carefully, and walked down the hallway to the kitchen. The light there was brighter. The table was already set. Plates, glasses, cutlery. In the center, a bowl of salad and a dish of baked salmon. I had invited my son and his family to stay with me for a while, 2 years earlier, after they'd had their second child, and their apartment in Park Slope had become, according to Ethan, a shoebox with nightmares and diapers. At first, the house had felt alive again. Children's voices, toys abandoned in corners, the small chaos of a young family. Tonight, it felt like a stage. Ethan sat at the table, phone in hand, scrolling. His hair was brushed back from his forehead, the first threads of gray at his temples catching the light. He nodded at something on the screen, then looked up at me. "Hey, Dad," he said. "You okay? You look like you saw a ghost." "Just thinking," I said. He smiled the quick, practiced smile of a man who's been selling ideas in conference rooms for a decade. "That's dangerous at your age," he joked. His wife, Sophie, came in from the stove with the salmon dish in a towel. She set it down, steam curling up into her face. She blinked it away and smiled at me. "Smells good, right?" she said. "I used your herb mix." "It smells great," I said, and realized it did. The familiarity of it almost knocked me sideways. Rosemary and lemon. My wife's recipe. The way Sophie had slipped it into her cooking had always felt like a tribute. Tonight it felt like something else, like camouflage. We sat, we passed plates, we ate. We talked about little things, the younger kid's science project, the older one's soccer tournament, the neighbor's barking dog. I said all the right words in all the right places. Like an actor reading a script he'd rehearsed so much, the meaning had drained out. Halfway through the meal, Ethan cleared his throat. "Dad," he said, and the tone was wrong immediately. Too careful, too arranged. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you. Nothing bad, just practical." I set my fork down. Ask, I said. He glanced at Sophie. She gave the smallest nod, barely a dip of her chin, but the rings on her fingers flashed in the light. I've been thinking about your paperwork, he said. Your will, the house, the accounts, all that stuff. All that stuff, in his mouth, sounded like a line item on a project plan. I updated everything after your mother died, I said. Is there a problem? No, he said quickly. I want to make sure it's all current, that it reflects what you want. Sophie leaned forward, resting her forearms on the table. Her eyes were a soft brown, the kind people instinctively trust. Tom, she said, you spent your whole career making sure other people's legal affairs were clear and precise. It would be a shame if things were messy for your own family because you didn't want to look at a few uncomfortable documents. The words were dressed as concern. Underneath, I could hear their bones clicking into place. What kind of mess are you worried about? I asked. She held my gaze. Her left hand tightened slightly around her fork. The veins on the backs of her fingers stood out. Nothing specific, she said. Just, if something happened to you, we want to make sure we can help. With decisions, with the house, with the finances. It's about everyone being protected. Protected. When you've sat across from enough people accused of fraud, you start to recognize certain words. Protected is one of them. So is help. So is temporary. I appreciate the thought, I said. I'll look at everything. Dinner went on. The salmon disappeared. The kids came in later, pulled up chairs, told us, with that breathless urgency children have, about the important tragedies of their day. A lost pencil, a missed goal, a teacher's praise. After we put them to bed, Ethan and Sophie settled onto the couch with the show streaming silently light across their faces. I lowered myself into my armchair, took the remote, and put on the news. The anchor's voice droned about markets and elections. The words ran together. What I watched wasn't the TV, it was their reflection in the window behind it. The glass was dark enough now to make a faint mirror. In it, I could see Sophie leaning in close, her hand on Ethan's arm, his head tilted toward her. Their mouths moved in low conversation. Once, twice, they glanced in my direction. Each time, they looked away quickly, assuming my attention was still on the anchor talking about deficit spending. They thought they were invisible to me. People always do right before they're not. If you're still here with me, listening to these small details, the angle of a photo frame, the way someone tightens their grip on a fork, you're probably the kind of person who already understands this. Danger rarely arrives with a shout. It creeps in with tiny rearrangements. If that makes something shift uneasily in your chest, don't ignore it. Keep listening. I went to bed that night but didn't sleep. The ceiling above my pillow was familiar. I knew every crack in the old plaster. Tonight they looked like a road map drawn by a hand that didn't care whether I understood it. I thought about my wife, about the day we signed the mortgage papers for this house, about the way she'd laughed when we realized the monthly payment was more than either of us had ever made in a month up until that point. If this doesn't work, she'd said, we can always move into your parents' basement. We made it work. We paid it off. We raised our son here. We buried her eventually, and I kept living in the rooms we had filled together. And now my son wanted to talk about paperwork and protection. At 3 a.m, I got out of bed. The house was quiet in that particular way city houses get at that hour. Not silent, but layered with thinner sounds. A distant siren, a truck on the highway, the soft buzz of the refrigerator. In the hallway, a strip of light fell under the door of the guest room. Ethan's home office now. I stood there for a moment, hand hovering near the doorknob, then walked past it. The mail was on the console by the door, a habit I'd never lost. Bring it in, drop it there, sort it over coffee. Tonight, 3 envelopes stood out immediately. 2 were from the IRS. I'd been expecting them for weeks. Routine notices related to a review of some old returns. Their flaps were sealed, but the glue line looked wrong. Too crooked, too shiny. One edge of one flap was pressed down over a wrinkle that should have been smooth. Someone had opened them and resealed them. Badly. The 3rd was from my pension administrator. It was empty. My hands started to shake. I put the envelopes down, took a breath, and then picked them up again. I took out my phone, photographed them from every angle. The odd glue line, the half-peeled corner, the postmark date. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and logged into the Postal Service's tracking system. The 2 IRS letters showed as delivered 3 days ago. I hadn't seen them until tonight. My heart was beating faster now, but my thoughts were not scattered. They were very, very clear. Scratch marks on the safe. Paper shifted. Questions about my memory. Opened mail. I had seen that pattern before, in case files, in witness statements. I had watched it unfold around other people. You soften them up. You make them doubt themselves. You convince everyone around them that their mind is slipping. And in the cracks that doubt opens, you slide documents, powers of attorney, deeds, transfers. You smile. You say, "It's just to help you, Dad. It's just so we can take care of things if you get sick. It's just temporary." Then one day they wake up and nothing is theirs anymore. I stared at the empty envelope on the table. They wanted me gone. Not physically. Not yet, at least. They wanted me out of the way, out of the decision-making, out of the signature line. They wanted this house. By the time the clock on the microwave blinked 4:17, I had my own plan. It was simple. Disappear. Watch. Document. Then act. They wanted me out of the picture. Fine. I would step out of the frame. On my terms. In the morning, I made coffee and scrambled eggs. I set the table. I moved like a man who had slept well, who had not spent the night building a quiet war in his head. Ethan came into the kitchen in his shirt and tie, phone in hand. Sophie followed in a robe, hair pulled back, eyes still puffy with sleep. The kids tumbled in later, half-dressed, arguing about cereal. "I've been thinking," I said casually, between sips of coffee. "Here we go," Ethan said, smirking. "Should I be worried?" "Always," I said. "But in this case, no. I might finally take that trip upstate your mother always wanted us to take." Sophie looked up from the jam she was spreading. "Trip?" she asked. "A cabin by a lake," I said. "Nothing fancy, just trees, water, some quiet. 2 weeks, maybe 3. I found a place on the internet last night." Ethan's eyes flicked towards Sophie, then back to his plate. He hit it well, but not well enough. A flash of calculation crossed his face. "Now," he said, "like this week?" "Sure," I said. "I'm retired. I have no meetings, no schedule. If I'm going to sit by some water and think about all the things I didn't do, better now than when my knees don't want to take me up the front steps anymore." Sophie's smile came late by half a second. "That sounds wonderful," she said. "You deserve a break, Tom. You've been through a lot. We'll handle things here. Don't worry about the house or the mail or anything. The word again. Anything. If you've ever heard someone you love say something like that and felt something in your gut twist, Not from gratitude, but from unease. Listen to that. We agreed I'd leave in 2 days. That gave me 48 hours to prepare. I made sure they saw what I wanted them to see. I printed out a reservation confirmation for a cabin 6 hours north. A real booking paid for with a credit card I rarely used. I left the paper on the hall console where anyone curious could find it. I called the cabin owner and told him I might not make it after all, that family matters had a way of changing plans. He said he understood. He didn't care so long as the card cleared. I packed a bag with clothes, a shaving kit, the book I'd been pretending to read for months. In the side pocket, I tucked the camera, the binoculars, a small notebook, a pen, and a little digital recorder I'd used once to practice a speech. I also did something else. I went to see a neighbor. Her name is Eleanor Price, 78 years old, widow, retired nurse. She lives 3 doors down in a narrower, older brownstone that always smells like lavender and pork chops. I'd known Eleanor casually for years. We exchanged hellos on the sidewalk, talked about snow shoveling and trash pickup, waved at each other's windows. I also knew, because prosecutors notice things, that she was always home. She sat by her front window a lot. She saw things. When I knocked that afternoon, she took longer than usual to open the door. When she did, her eyes narrowed. "Thomas," she said, "you look like a man whose house is on fire and doesn't want to say it." "I was a prosecutor, remember?" I said. "I'm always dramatic." "Come in," she said, stepping aside. Her living room was crowded with furniture that had lived in that house longer than some of our neighbors had been alive. Lace curtains, heavy wooden chairs, framed photos of people I didn't know, a crucifix over the doorway, slightly crooked. I sat. I told her everything. It took longer than I thought it would. When you speak facts aloud, they become heavier. She listened without interruption, hands folded over the top of her cane, eyes sharp. When I finished, she sat there for a moment, then sighed. "I wondered when you were going to notice," she said. It was my turn to narrow my eyes. "Notice what?" She lifted a hand and pointed her cane toward my house through the front window. "I sit here," she said. "I watch my street. Not because I'm nosy, though I am, but because I don't have that many other things left to do. I've seen your boy coming and going at odd hours. I've seen envelopes, official-looking ones, arrive and vanish. I've seen that woman of his open your door with a key when you weren't home. I've seen a man in a suit with a briefcase go in after dark. Twice. I felt my jaw tighten. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked. She tapped her cane twice on the floor. "Would you have believed me?" she asked. "Or would you have told me I was imagining things because I'm old and alone and have nothing better to do than make up trouble?" We both knew the answer. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out a small, dog-eared notebook. "I can't fix my own mistakes," she said quietly. "My daughter cleaned me out before she died, took everything that had my name on it, and said it was for my best interest. I didn't want to see it, so I didn't. That's on me. But I can watch now. So I write. Dates, times, license plates." She opened the notebook and turned it toward me. In a neat, looping hand, she had written, "June 3rd, 11:12 p.m. Man in dark suit, briefcase, enters 14B with tall sun. Leaves 12:03 a.m. June 7th, 9:47 p.m. Same man, shorter visit, 10:31 p.m. Leaves, carries red folder. My red folder. If you're still here and any part of you is thinking of that one older person in your life who always sees things and worries too much, maybe don't laugh them off so quickly next time. They see more than we think. They also know what it costs to be ignored. I reached across and put my hand over Eleanor's. "I'm sorry about your daughter," I said. She nodded once, the movement short, efficient. "Don't be," she said. "Just don't let them do it to you." 2 days later, I left. The kids hugged me, small arms clamped around my waist. Sophie kissed my cheek and told me to send photos. Ethan loaded the bag into the trunk and clapped my shoulder. "Enjoy the peace and quiet," he said. "You've earned it." I started the car and pulled away. In the rearview mirror, I watched them wave. As soon as I turned the corner, I turned again, heading not toward the highway north, but toward Queens. The motel I chose was as forgettable as a bad dream. Multicolored neon sign missing 2 letters, parking lot with more oil stains than cars, lobby that smelled vaguely of bleach and coffee that had been brewed 3 hours too long. The clerk didn't look up long enough from his TV show to care about my name. In my room, the bedspread was patterned with a generic design that might have been flowers or stains. The bathroom door didn't quite close unless you lifted it an inch. The air conditioner rattled when it turned on. It was perfect. I checked in under a different name. I pulled the SIM card from my phone and put both in the safe, bolted to the closet floor. I sat on the bed, the springs complaining under my weight, and listened. The quiet there was different from the quiet at home. At home, silence after a certain hour feels earned. In a motel, it feels defensive, like everyone is pretending they're somewhere else. If you're still with me now, through the lamp, the safe, the talk of protection, the neighbor with her notebook, then you're probably someone who doesn't bail when a story gets slow and uncomfortable. That kind of patience is rare, and it's what keeps some people safe. Don't lose it. I stayed there for the rest of the day, letting the hours pass. I napped in short bursts. I wrote in the notebook. I circled and underlined names. Ethan, Sophie, Brandon Cole. I'd learned his name in one of the emails left open on Ethan's laptop. Buyer, unknown. When the sky outside the faded curtains turned deep blue, I got up, dressed, and drove back to Brooklyn. I parked 2 streets away. I walked the rest of the distance with a baseball cap pulled low. I could have been any older man out for air. People barely glanced at me. The house across from mine was still for sale. The open house sign that had stood out front for 3 Sundays in a row leant crooked against the stoop, forgotten. The lockbox was still screwed to the rail. It took me maybe 3 seconds to key in the number. The door opened with a soft, dry sigh. Inside, the air was cooler than outside, heavy with the smell of paint and a faint echo of the cleaning fluid they'd used weeks ago. I moved through the empty rooms like a ghost. On the 2nd floor, in the front, I found the bedroom that looked directly into my living room and study. It had no curtains, no furniture, just a rectangular patch of street light on the bare floor. I unfolded the chair I'd brought, set it back from the window where the light wouldn't catch me, and sat. I raised the binoculars. From this angle, my life looked like a stage set. The lights were on in the living room. The TV screen flickered. Ethan paced back and forth behind the couch, phone pressed to his ear, head bent. Sophie sat at the edge of the sofa, elbows on her knees, staring at something on the coffee table. She was holding the red folder. As I watched, she opened it, took out a stack of documents and smoothed them with the flat of her hand. The paper caught the light differently than the legal pads she usually used. Thicker, more expensive. The kind used for deeds, contracts, things that bind you longer than you expect. Half an hour later, headlights swept across my front windows. A dark sedan pulled up. A man in a suit got out. He checked his watch, then looked up at the house. He had the posture of someone who lives in conference rooms, confident without quite meaning it. I took photos, his face, his license plate, the way he paused at the door, straightened his tie. Ethan opened the door before he could knock. They shook hands. The contact was brief, transactional. No one greeted this man like a friend. He was a tool. I watched them move through my living room toward the dining table. Sophie stood when they entered. She held the red folder against her chest like a shield. They exchanged words I couldn't hear. Then they sat. What followed was a scene I had seen in other rooms, with other people, for other reasons. The specifics were different. The shape was the same. Papers laid out, fingers tracing lines, heads bowed over clauses, pens uncapped, stamps pressed down, checks glanced at, signatures signed. From across the street, I watched my own son lean his arm on my dining table and sign his name on documents he had no right to sign. I watched my daughter-in-law slide my folder across the wood to a man who'd never shaken my hand. I watched them raise glasses of something pale and sparkling and toast. I watched them toast my absence. At some point during that long, brutal hour, the door behind me opened. "Thought you'd be up here," a voice said softly. I turned. Eleanor stood in the doorway, her cane in one hand, her notebook in the other. She had a cardigan on over her dress. Her hair was pinned up hastily. Her eyes were bright. "How did you get in?" I asked. She lifted the lockbox key and wiggled it between her fingers. "Realtor left the code on a sign once," she said. "She thinks I'm just an old woman who wants to look at the kitchen. She's not wrong." She came to stand beside me, looking out over my shoulder at my lit-up house. "You see it now," she said. "I see it," I said. For a while, we watched together in silence. On the table in my dining room, the man in the suit picked up a document, turned it sideways, and held it up to the light. He traced his finger over my forged signature. Ethan shifted in his seat. Sophie said something, smiling tightly. Eleanor opened her notebook and wrote the time. "This is going to hurt," she said, not looking at me. "I know," I said. "Good," she said. "People who go into this kind of thing thinking it won't hurt make stupid choices." After the man left, after the last light in my house went out, after the car taillights disappeared down the block, Eleanor and I sat in that empty bedroom for a while longer. She poured coffee from a thermos she'd brought. It was bitter and too strong, which made it perfect. "Why are you helping me?" I asked finally. She took a sip, then set the cup down on the windowsill. "Because no one did it for me," she said. "Because I know what it feels like to look at your own child and realize they've been counting your money instead of your birthdays. Because if I'm going to sit by a window and watch life go by, I'd like to think I'm at least keeping someone from being quietly erased." We stayed until the first light of dawn turned the brick of the buildings across the street a softer, dirtier red. I went back to the motel. I lay on the bed. I stared at the ceiling. I didn't sleep. If this already feels like too much, like you're carrying more than just my story on your shoulders right now, don't just let that weight dissolve when this is over. There might be someone in your orbit who needs you to notice their mismatched papers and their too sweet offers of help. Stories like this are ugly. They're also warnings. Don't keep warnings to yourself. The next days were practical. I went back into my own house when I knew it would be empty. I walked into my son's makeshift office and opened drawers until I found the red folder. My hands shook as I lifted it. Inside lay the forged power of attorney. It was worse up close. The text was boilerplate. I, Thomas Mercer, hereby appoint my son, Ethan Mercer, as my lawful attorney in fact. It went on for pages. Broad powers, very broad. The kind of document that, in the wrong hands, can turn a life into a shell. My name looked back at me from the bottom of the page, written by a hand that had studied mine. It was a good forgery. The loops were in the right places. The slant of the letters mimicked mine. But the pressure was wrong. The confidence at the beginning of the signature tapered off too soon. The middle letters were careful when mine were always careless. I took photographs of everything. The pages, the notary seal, the date, 2 months earlier when I had been home watching a game with my grandson. Underneath the power of attorney were copies of emails between Ethan and the agent in the suit, and between Sophie and someone with a California area code in their address. Once I understood who was who, the pattern in the messages made me cold. Once his house sells, we'll finally have enough to make the move, Sophie wrote. He thinks we're just upgrading in the city, she wrote in another. He has no idea I'm not staying. I read it all. Every line in which I was reduced to a lever pulled for cash. Every line in which Ethan was reduced to a stepping stone. It's a strange thing, feeling sorry for someone and furious with them at the same time. On one hand, he was betraying me. On the other, he was being betrayed. In the end, those two things canceled each other out. His choices were still his. I put everything back exactly the way I'd found it. Then I went to war, not in the way people imagine. No shouting matches, no slammed doors, just appointments. First with Julia, the estate lawyer. We turned my house into a fortress on paper, a living trust, recorded and notarized, that moved title out of my name into an entity I controlled. Any attempt to sell it now without my consent would fail at the county clerk's office. Second, with a notary, to create a sworn affidavit stating clearly that I had never, on any date, signed any power of attorney authorizing Ethan or anyone else to sell my property. Third, with the bank, to add layers of verification to every account. No online changes, no phone approvals, body in the branch or nothing. Fourth, with Eleanor, to make sure her notes and her eyes would be preserved when the time came. During those days, I lived between the motel and my appointments, a man in limbo. My house was occupied by people who thought I was thinking about lakes and pine trees. My mind was on dates, signatures, seals. If you've ever had to choose between being a parent and being a person who deserves not to be robbed, you know the kind of tearing I'm talking about. In those hours, I stopped asking myself which one I should be and started asking myself which one I could live with. The morning I decided to confront them, I put on my old courtroom suit. It didn't fit the way it used to. A little tighter at the waist, a little looser in the shoulders. The man in the mirror looked older than the one who had stood beside juries 10 years ago, but there was still something in his eyes that I recognized. Resolve. I let Ethan and Sophie leave the house before me that day. They were dressed up. He wore his wedding suit. She wore a dark blue dress I'd seen her in only once before, at a funeral. They didn't say where they were going. They didn't have to. Julia met me in the lobby of the Midtown office tower where the closing was scheduled. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I've never been more sure of anything," I said. The conference room was all glass and chrome. The title company's logo was frosted onto the door. Inside, the buyer sat at one end of the table. Ethan and Sophie sat on one side, Brandon, the agent, beside them. The title officer sat across from them with a stack of documents. When I walked in, Chairs scraped, shoulders stiffened, faces drained. "Dad," Ethan said, half rising. "What are you—" "I'm where I belong," I said. "In the room where my house is being sold." The title officer looked from me to the file in front of her. "Mr. Mercer," she asked, "we have a power of attorney." "Yes," I said. "You do. And it's fake." I opened my portfolio and began to lay out the pieces. The affidavit, the trust documents, the photographs of the forged signature side by side with my real one, the emails, the audio recording of Ethan and Sophie discussing my supposed confusion. The room changed temperature. The buyer leaned back and shook his head. "I'm out," he said. "I'm not getting dragged into whatever this is." Brandon protested. The title officer went pale. Ethan tried to talk. Sophie tried to spin. Julia cut through every attempt with calm, lethal precision. "This closing is cancelled," the title officer said finally. "And this matter is going to the district attorney's office, immediately." I looked at my son. He looked at me. "Dad," he said, "please, we can fix this. We can talk about this at home." "No," I said. "Home is why we're here. You tried to take it from me. You tried to take everything from me. When a stranger does that, I call it fraud. When my own son does it, I still call it fraud." For a second, something like the boy he once was flickered across his face. Then it vanished. I picked up my papers, slid them back into the portfolio, and left. If you ever find yourself in a room like that, whether you're the one confronting or the one finally admitting to yourself what's happening, remember this: love does not cancel reality. It doesn't erase signatures. It doesn't make theft into misunderstanding. And if you know someone who's inching toward that room, push this kind of story into their hands before they get there. Quietly. It might be the only warning they get. The legal aftermath took months. Statements, interviews, meetings with detectives who knew my name from old case files. A prosecutor 10 years younger than I'd been when I tried my first big case, looking at me across a table and saying, "We'll take it from here." I sat in the gallery on the day Ethan and Sophie appeared in court for sentencing. They had taken plea deals. They had admitted to more than I'd expected, less than I'd hoped. That's how these things go. The judge spoke about trust, about exploitation, about how the law looks even more harshly on those who prey on family because the betrayal runs deeper. He handed down probation, community service, fines, an order for restitution, restrictions on Sophie's ability to work in certain fields for several years. It wasn't cinematic justice. No prison doors slammed, no wrists cuffed dramatically. Just the slow, grinding machinery of consequence. Afterward, in the hallway, Ethan approached me. He looked smaller. "I'm sorry," he said. "I believe you're sorry you were caught," I said. "I don't know if you're sorry for what you did." He winced. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. "You can't," I said. "You can live differently from now on. That's the only fixing you get." "Can I ever come home?" he asked. His voice cracked on the last word. There are people who will say that my answer should have been yes. That blood trumps everything. That forgiveness is a duty. Maybe they're right. Maybe they're not. What I know is this. I had spent my life telling juries that actions have consequences that don't vanish because you cry. I wasn't about to turn around and tell my own heart a different story. "No," I said. "You can visit your kids at their mother's place. You can call me if you're in real trouble. But you don't get to live under my roof again." He nodded slowly, like a man realizing that a door he'd always assumed would be open was not just closed, but bricked over. Eleanor was waiting for me outside the courthouse. She sat on a bench, cane resting across her lap. "Well?" she asked. "It's done," I said. "Justice?" she asked. "Enough," I said. She nodded. "That's sometimes all we get," she said. "Enough." We walked down the courthouse steps together, two old people carrying things that didn't show. If you've stayed with me all the way here, through the first scratch on the safe to the last word in that courtroom, then maybe you and I share something. A refusal to pretend that certain lines once crossed are just smudges. Stay close to stories that remind you of that. They are not comfortable, but they are armor. The brownstone is quieter now. The toys are gone from the corners. The breakfast cereal aisle in my kitchen is shorter. There are no small feet pounding down the stairs at 6 in the morning. I miss all of that more than I can say. But when I put my key into the new lock and turn it, the click is clean. The house feels like mine again. Not because a piece of paper says so, but because I chose not to be removed from it in silence. I work now in a different kind of courtroom. Community centers, church basements, library meeting rooms. I stand in front of rows of older faces and talk about powers of attorney, about trusts, about how to say no to your own children without apologizing like you've committed a crime. I never use Ethan's name. I never use Sophie's. I don't have to. I describe a man, a house, a pattern. After one talk, a woman in her 70s came up to me. Her hands shook as she dug a folded document out of her purse. "My son wants me to sign this," she said. "He says it's just to help, to pay my bills. It feels wrong." I read it. It was broad, too broad. "It is wrong," I said. Her eyes filled with tears. "If I say no," she whispered, "he might stop visiting." "He might," I said. "But if you say yes, he might stop visiting anyway, and he'll take your house with him." She stared at the paper for a long moment, then with a resolve that reminded me a little of Julia's, a little of Eleanor's, she tore it in half. I don't tell these stories because I enjoy them. I don't enjoy reliving the worst months of my life. The nights in the motel, the look on my son's face, the day my grandchildren moved out of my house with their backpacks and their questions. I tell them because silence is the dark water these things grow in. If what you've heard sitting with me today has lodged somewhere behind your ribs, if you're thinking of a parent, a grandparent, an aunt who lives alone, or even of yourself, don't let it end when this voice stops. Talk to someone. Ask to see what you're being asked to sign. Ask again. And if someone gets angry that you're asking, remember that anger is information. And if there's someone in your life who might be walking slowly toward the kind of night I spent across the street from my own house, watching my family celebrate my disappearance, share a story like this with them. Maybe not all at once. Maybe just the parts they're ready to hear. This house, my house, is quiet now. Sometimes, on summer nights, I sit in my study with the window open. The lamp is exactly where I want it. The photograph of my wife faces me. The safe is closed. The papers inside are in order. Through the glass, I can see the room across the street where Eleanor once stood beside me and watched my life unravel and reweave itself. The city hums around us. People walk their dogs. Kids ride bikes. Someone laughs too loudly on a phone call. Life keeps going. I am older. I am more alone than I expected to be at this age. But I am not erased. I am not protected out of my own story. I am still the one who decides where the photograph on my desk faces. There are lines I will not let anyone cross again, not even my own blood. And if you remember nothing else from all of this, remember that you are allowed to draw your own lines. You are allowed to defend them. You are allowed to choose your dignity over someone else's comfort. Sometimes that choice is the only thing standing between you and a signature that turns your whole life into someone else's asset. That, in the end, is what this is about. Not revenge, not punishment, just the simple, stubborn refusal to disappear.